Tucker Putin. Didn't expect it, but it happened. And they've sat down and had an interview. And I wanted to cover this earlier when everyone was freaking out about it. But I just decided that was the wrong thing to do because it wasn't out. Like, why is everyone getting mad or hyped? It's like, it's not, you haven't seen it. So there's that. So now I have seen it, been published. If you'd like to go and see it, I mean, you can go and find it wherever. I think it's here. There we are. It's on Tucker's Twitter page. You can go and enjoy that. But otherwise, I have an announcement to make first before we get into that interview and what happened and the responses, which is first and foremost, sorry, I don't know what's wrong with my voice today. Been down the pub, that's probably why. Anyway, Calvin Robertson has joined us, and he's here to tell everyone that he's got a show with us now. He's left GB News and is now joining us, and it's Common Sense Crusade. So if you would like to join, you have to subscribe to Lotus Eaters, and if you would like to join and send in comments, you subscribe to Gold Tier and give 50, you give, I think it's £40 a month. You get 50% off for the first 3 months if you use code Crusade. Oh, it's £30 a month. There we are. It's cheaper than I even thought. So go and do that if you'd like to send in comments. Otherwise, £5 a month, you get access to the thing and everything else that's on the website. So there we are. My shilling is done. To the interview. So it's 2 hours. Quite long. I don't think most people are going to watch the 2 hours. I'll be frank. But you can see the number of views it's got already just on Twitter. Never mind on his website. 77.3 million.
Tucker seems to be, he's the king of news these days, right? In our world, in 2024, he's the king of news, is he not?
I mean, he's the guy that sets the agenda at this point, if you've got viewership like that, which is hard to tell because it's Twitter, so they're counting people who just scroll past, of course. But either way,
still,
it is a huge event. Not to mention, it obviously blew up in the media of people talking about it.
Don't mainstream places, like Fox or CBS or whatever, or MSNBC, don't they struggle to get a few million, don't they?
Yeah, I think CNN now struggles with getting 300,000.
Yeah, they are saying that. I remember he left Fox, didn't he? He was chucked out of Fox, wasn't he? And I think he's trying to drive the narrative now. I think he's got an agenda, isn't he, to be more popular than Fox, as it were.
Well, yeah.
He's probably the most popular.
He
was
clearly,
on Fox, he was the most popular guy, wasn't he, on Fox?
And now on his own orders of magnitude more popular.
So, I mean, great news for him, personally.
Yeah.
But he's done funny interviews all the time. He interviewed, what was it, that rapper, I forget, Kanye West. And there were some rumors about whether or not he cut some stuff because it was before Kanye went public with his views on the tribe.
Okay.
There's some rumors that
cut that out.
There's some rumors that Tucker was interviewing him and being like, "Huh?
We're editing this." Yeah, definitely.
Because Tucker's had a few quite small, obscure people on. Like, didn't he have Raw Egg Nationalist on once?
Yeah, he's willing to talk to anyone.
Yeah, people go up there. He's got a cabin, isn't he, up there?
That's
So
brilliant.
he hasn't got any TV or social media himself. Apparently, just books and stuff. Yeah.
So the story for people who don't know is that he agreed to meet up with Putin and do an interview a few years ago when the war broke out. And according to Tucker, the Biden administration interfered, as in they released information about all this to try and stop the interview from happening. And it meant that they couldn't agree on the details, the two teams, so it didn't happen. And then now they organized another interview. Same thing happened. It was leaked that this was going to happen. And they just went, screw it. I'm sick of the interference. And then they went to interview him in Moscow. That's their version of events, so that's that. And I'm going to try and keep my views to myself as much as possible as I lay out what happened, because of course we don't have 2 hours to watch the full bloody thing. Yeah. So, the Cliff Notes version. Most of it, and I mean like the first 30 to 40 minutes, is a history lesson from Putin. And Tucker Carlson wants to conduct a usual American political interview where he asks him, for example, the first question, why did you decide to invade Ukraine? And Putin responds with 40 minutes of history.
That's right.
And his conclusions are that Ukraine is fake. It's not real. It's the
border people. Wasn't it the border people? That's what they are, basically.
And he starts off in 860 something or whatever, and then goes decade by decade for 40 bloody minutes, telling you about what was there, what happened, the different people that conquered it, when Ukraine as a state began, where the Ukrainian people as a thing began in his view. And mostly he blames it on the Bolsheviks, the Austrian interference, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union. And his personal view is that Ukrainians and Russians are basically the same bloody people, and it's all interference by foreign powers or Bolsheviks that made that happen. So it's very long. And to be honest, I've watched a lot of Putin's interviews before, speaking to some Russian friends of mine, because I wanted to get their view on this.
You've been to Russia, haven't you?
Many times. And most people who are used to him found this incredibly boring, the whole interview. Because he is just laying out his own worldview, which he has many times.
Yep.
And for a Russian audience or people who have watched what he said before, nothing new. But for Tucker Carlson's audience, mainly Americans, I imagine they don't spend a lot of time seeing Vladimir Putin. So maybe it's of interest.
Or hearing about the 9th century.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have
hearing about the Kievan Rus. It's probably completely new to...
No concept of it. Yeah.
So to the English-speaking audience, this instantly became a meme.
Sorry to interrupt the video, but I just want to let you know that we have a brand new selection of merch on our merch store. These won't be in the store forever, so if you do want them, go and get them now. Thanks very much.
And I think this is probably the biggest thing to come out of it, frankly. So, I mean, Nick Dixon making a joke here. Tucker, so why did you invade Ukraine? Putin. Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Vaslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to the throne. I'm not kidding. That's how he starts the conversation. So it's just like, okay. And then this just became several memes. Tucker Carlson, I have to explain Ukraine. So he just pulls out Hoi 4 or EU4 there. And there's some other jokes out of this. I want to discuss fan fiction. You mean Frodo and Sam? No. We talk about Atlantis is where we shall begin. And this just goes on and on. Right. Why did you invade Ukraine? Well, 4 billion years ago, the Earth was cooling.
Fair.
Because, of course, for most people, this is quite strange. Because this is what you'd usually get if you asked a Western politician, Rishi Sunak here. So you could tell us a little bit about the history of your country? Yes, well, in 1948.
That's the start.
Empire Windrush left Kingston Harbour.
The start of it, yeah.
Yeah.
It is that, yeah.
I'd actually be surprised if Rishi Sunak even could tell us a history from
Yeah, well, yes.
But this being the most focus of people in the West, of obviously, god damn, he seems to know his stuff. Now, it might be wrong. You could argue his view on history, the various events. What would be the point of us sitting and doing that for 20 minutes? It's a proper hour-long thing you'd have to do. And so, what's the big takeaway? Well, it's a huge difference in character. And Tucker found massive frustration with Putin on this, where Tucker kept trying to interrupt and ask, normal questions that you would expect. Like, so why did you invade Ukraine? When do you see that you should have invaded? And Putin's just not having it. He's just, no, I was in the middle of something. So that's that.
That's a classic trick a very important politician or statesman can do. They just say, no, wait, you're going to let me finish.
I was in the middle of my lecture, though.
Well, that's what he's there to give, isn't he?
And of course, Putin is, a real statesman, a powerhouse on the international stage. There's no doubt about that. So if he wants to say, he's going to say whatever he wants to say, right?
Yeah, you can come to me and I'll give you a lecture.
And that's exactly what he did. I mean, a lot of people made a joke because, this is not even what you'd get out of Rishi Sunak here. But a lot of people making jokes. Imagine if Putin was talking about Western issues and was a Western leader. It's like, so I'd like to talk to you about the American Civil War. You mean the Missouri Compromise? No. This begins with the Saxon warlords in Horsa on the shores of Britain in 449 AD. And that's where he'd start, at least seemingly from how he laid it all out. So that's the big takeaway.
I'd probably start a little earlier when the Romans left under Honorius. I mean, okay, Henderson Horsa, okay, I'll allow it.
What he's trying to do here is highlight his own knowledge of history in comparison to what Biden puts out. I think Biden put out something this morning that just said that Mexico should allow Gazan refugees, Palestinian refugees, to come into the country to then come into the United States. It was a very basic sort of thing that Biden had said. What he said is a massive contrast to that. And I think that's what he's trying to highlight to whoever's listening is look at my depth of history of knowledge and look at your president. I mean, it's ridiculous at this point.
Yeah, chalk and cheese.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's not really going out on a limb that Putin is, a very, very serious individual, and Joe Biden is a joke, a clown, a puppet, a nothing, an empty bag.
Yeah, crib.
Right. And I also think it's I don't know if you were going to go on to this, but it is also a trend in the West, certainly, to have sort of low resolution, to make arguments that history only started in 2014 or 1948 or whatever. History, whatever we're talking about now, you only need to know that the story started in the 1970s or whatever. And with Ukraine particularly, it's that dialed up, right?
Yeah, of course.
Don't worry about what happened before 2014. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Well, Putin's just perfectly, really brilliantly making the point. No. Exactly. History is a long, long line, and we can go back to the 9th century without being too absurd about it.
Well, people think it started in 2020. I mean, a lot of people that write to me say, well, Russia invaded Ukraine. It's like, that's your limit of, you're not going back any further than that then. That's not 2014, you're not doing it. It starts in 2020 for you, does it? And that's where our brains are at the moment. I think with social and TikTok and everything else, it's very easy to go, I've been saying this outside to your guys as well, like, America good, Russia bad. A lot of people love to hold those views. Very binary, very black and white basic views. It's comfortable, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like, well, I'm on the good side and that's the bad side. Whereas if you speak to a lot of your Russian people, they will go, hang on a second, it's a little bit more complicated than that. A little bit more nuanced, you know what I mean? There's a little bit more. And I think what's happening here is I think the whole Ukrainian, he's saying, look, Russia is quite fractious at the moment and we need to solidify the country a little bit. And Ukraine is about providing that kind of border and that focus for the people. But
So I think you've got a perfect example in what you're talking about, the simplicity of mindset, and what Kamala Harris said when she was asked about the conflict. And if you recall, she literally said, quote, Russia, a big country, attacked Ukraine, a small country, so we have to stand up for the small country.
it would surprise me.
And it was like you were talking to a child. It was unbearable. And you are correct that there's an obvious massive gap here. But I think you're wrong on the idea that this is a move by Putin to try and show off. Because as I mentioned, my Russian friends and the people I've spoken to, who are usual with his speeches, found this boring because this isn't a new thing. He does this every lecture, very regularly. Usually it's to just a camera because he doesn't do many interviews.
Yeah.
And so this is actually just his wheelhouse day to day, nothing new.
Yeah.
And really, that's the big story: is that people got to see the difference between our leaders,
I think so.
which is, of course, you can argue morals and policy and everything else, but this just on a human level. This is a man who, if has a false version of history, has a version of history,
Yeah.
understands it in depth.
Yeah.
And then you've got our guys who literally quote "big country, small country."
Well, this is what I meant by that disparity. Is what it kind of, it's not he's trying to highlight that, but it will be highlighted by the fact he's a very serious man that knows his history. I mean, I get called a Putin apologist the whole time, but I mean, I used to study electronic warfare in Russia, and it's the most dull subject in the world ever. Don't get me wrong, but there's a reason that they're very good at surface and missile systems and ground-based air defense systems, and it's regimented. They're very good at those sort of things, and he's a very serious man, and also you have to. This is what people don't. You'll know more about this than me, of course. The East isn't like the West, but we always apply our own standards when we're talking about things. Like they must feel like this because we feel like this, so therefore they must feel. But it's different over there. I mean, Afghanistan was different, Iraq was different, and we both know about those. And to have someone in charge of Russia, I mean, we're lucky we have this man in charge of Russia now, because what's going to come after him? I mean, no one knows, but it could be 20 times as worse as I think we're quite
Be
fortunate.
schizophrenic.
It could be anything, couldn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
he's holding together so many disparate groups in the country, and that's the person that's doing it. And if he wasn't there, and one day he won't be there, we'll probably look back and wish he was.
It could be worse. It could be another Lenin or Stalin type person.
It probably.
Well, I mean, it could be better as well.
It could. It could. He does murder journalists at a whim. That's what I've said about Putin. I've got a long list of issues with the man.
Sure.
But if you zoom out from that, I agree with you. It could be so much worse.
Compared to which Russian leader would you have?
Right.
No,
Right.
Okay.
Like, do you want an Ivan the Terrible? Also, I'll just very quickly build on the point you said that it's different in the East. It's different in Russia. The psyche of the Russian is different to that of Western Europe or America. And look at their literature, just for a start, just to scratch the surface.
Sure.
It's a different view of the world.
Unbelievably.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
I've got two thoughts on this. And he spent 40 bloody minutes on history, and I don't think there's no reason why. Tucker says, as a piece to camera beforehand, he initially thought this was filibustering, and he just got really annoyed. But looking back on it, he's like, oh, no, okay, they actually do think differently than us. It's not a small thing.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock, wasn't it?
And the two thoughts I have on this is that you've got an American and a Russian speaking, and America is in a quite odd place compared to the old world, and a new old world versus new world is definitely a thing. This doesn't make the old world better or anything of the sort. I'm just trying to explain why these people are different. Is that the new world, especially the United States, as you say, will come to these issues and think in the last 30 years or something. Whereas the old world doesn't. We have long lines of ancient ethnic groups in these places and the interactions they've had. So it all matters. And that won't matter if the Russian Federation was a pure ideological state, because then it would just be about ideology. Now, in my view, the Russian Federation, especially since the war began, has become very much an ethno-state, especially after the Soviet Union. Compared to them, it's a huge difference. And it's why he speaks in ethnic terms, and why, when it comes to this subject, you have to give 1,000-year history all of a sudden. Because if you're talking about your conflict and why you invaded, it's all about, well, we need to protect our ethnic people and blah, blah, blah. And these people, the Ukrainians, aren't really a thing because of this 1,000-year history. Agree with it or disagree with it, that's fine. I'm not making an argument for his position. I'm saying, why does he say this? And I think it's those two differences, which to a New World American type such as Joe Biden, for example, would you ever get anything about him to understand that old world, new world difference? And does he understand ethno-states and their demands?
No. No,
You'll never get
you
there.
can't. It's a new world. Yeah, you're absolutely right. New world, old world. I mean, people don't understand that. And all I say is, look, he's got to put up with a lot. Like he has to hold a lot together. This is what he does. It's not what, say, the president of America does.
Massively different problems.
It's not even understandable. I mean, I struggle and I read a lot. I can't even, it's not even something I wasn't born with it. You know what I mean? I struggle to understand this, and yet it's all there laid out. I mean, you're a historian. I mean, you know all this stuff. It's not easy. And I think you're absolutely right. That's why he is saying, I'm not giving a lecture. I'm just telling you, this is what I'm dealing with. I think that's what he's done to Tucker, is to say, I'm dealing with this. What is Biden dealing with? Because it's not this. You know what I mean? And that's what I'm dealing with. I think that's the difficulty.
One thing, as I said, I'm not disagreeing with you whatsoever. Everything you said about the new world, old world thing, absolutely 100% agree with. Just to add to it, I would say that it's not even sort of the new world being America, shorthand for America, but also just between, say, Britain and France and Russia. So like throughout sort of the 17th, 18th, 19th century, the great game, the great battle of will and power between the Western Europe and Russia for a couple of hundred years there, we struggled, never really came to terms with what it is, what it means to be Russian, the Russian experience, the soul of Russia.
They're a very strange people.
Yeah, it's not European, actually. It's certainly not Western European, let's say. And it's a million miles away from the United States. If you're not born and raised into it, I think it's difficult, if not impossible, to ever truly grasp.
So I wanted to focus on this especially because not only did he, but it was actually, I think, the most interesting part of the interview. The rest of it was rather not that interesting. I have some clips of what I think might be the best things, but you may have noticed if you're looking on social media, there aren't many because it just wasn't the case. Now, I'll quickly list the rest of what he argues. So he then goes on to argue the historical reality of his worldview of what happened. And then he gets asked about, well, okay, after the Cold War, what happened? And he says that basically the West rejected us. He offered to join NATO and was told by the then president, Bill Clinton, oh, that would be fine. And then the president came back after speaking to his people that, no, it's not fine. He's like, oh,
yeah,
okay. So he says, well, okay, we might not be part of NATO, but we could still be another country. There's plenty of those. They then got rejected to work with the Americans on an anti-Iran project. It's a missile defense project there. That's an example he gives. He then lists NATO expansion, but it's really not a big issue. In the American sphere talking about the conflict, they usually focus on NATO expansion, but he didn't talk about it much. But he mainly focused on the fact that the promises of presidents are basically bloody worthless, because in his interaction, he'll go to an American president, try and get some deal, and then the president will go and speak to the men in suits.
Yeah.
Or nothing will happen. And the best example he gives is that they found out, in his view, that the Americans were funding terrorists in the Caucasus, so the Islamic extremists in Chechnya and whatnot. Yeah. He went to the president, gave them the evidence, he says. The president said, I'm going to kick their effing ass, the people who were funding them, and then nothing happened. They then wrote to the CIA twice to get a response, and apparently the CIA responded, we support the opposition in Russia and will keep supporting them.
Brilliant.
The opposition being Islamist terrorists.
Brilliant.
So that's what he says. So,
well, he's probably not wrong though, is it? I mean, the CIA doesn't know what the CIA is doing. So the CIA director doesn't actually know what the whole of the CIA is doing. That's the whole point of the CIA, is you don't know what people are doing, but you've got the common goal of defeating America's enemies. And we all know that. And so with America's enemies, he sees that as Russia, for example. He's not wrong. I mean, we talked about the civil service earlier, didn't we? I mean, we talked about the uni party. It doesn't matter whether you've got Labour or Conservative it's still going to happen in the way it's always been happening. We're still been infiltrated by progressives, whatever it might be, in the civil service in this country. I don't see America as any different. And he's right, but you can trust what he says because he's going to be there forever, and he has been there forever. Right. So when you're dealing with someone, arguably, if he gives you his word, he's going to, well, okay, but he's going to be there, isn't he? You know what I mean? You can still say, hang on, it was you.
He may betray you, but he will still be there at the end.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like it was the last guy who's not here anymore. We didn't agree with the last guy anyway, you know what I mean? But this guy's my word. You might be out in 2 years, mate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's all he's saying there. Is like, it's a figurehead as opposed to a populist sort of insertion of.
So this is a running complaint he has. It's not just those examples. So he then goes on to Ukraine and says that, in his view, the Ukrainian president who was elected decided to delay a decision on signing an agreement with the EU or Russia. This was what caused the coup or revolution in Ukraine. He calls it a coup, and then basically concludes, as a result, Ukraine is now not only fake, but also gay, because it's not a legitimate state. He says that the CIA were promoting the opposition in Ukraine whilst lying to the Russians that they weren't doing it. Average state stuff. He then says that the West refused to deal with Russia after the coup happened. So that's the moment he decided that war was going to be inevitable, in which case, he has a famous quote on this: if conflict is inevitable, always be the one to strike first. That's his quote. And so they assisted Donbass and then invaded. And then he says that they were offered a deal that if they withdrew from Kiev, remember when they were driving down, that they would have a peace deal signed. And in his words, he says the reason they withdrew was because this was an offer. And once they withdrew, the peace deal was burnt. And they were like, oh, screw you guys.
Did Boris have something to do with that as well?
Was that at the time when Boris went over?
That was before Boris.
Before, it was before.
But then another issue came up where they could get a peace deal, and apparently Boris came in and scuppered it. So his narrative is one of, I mean, we tried to deal with you, but I literally don't know who to talk to, because even your big leader, the president, I come and talk to him, and it either gets burnt or ignored. So I actually can't communicate with you on any level. And this is what's led to this. That's his version.
Is he wrong, though?
No, I don't think so.
Because if you look at I saw Ben Wallace put a tweet out this morning of when he was defense secretary, and he said, in contrast to what this is, this is what I wrote last year. And you read it and you think you wouldn't be able to talk to Ben Wallace either. Yeah. Literally, his mind's made up. There's no, and you see that with a lot of people that comment on either my videos or anything else. Their mind is made up. I was just chatting to one of you boys out there and saying exactly the same thing. It's like, it's important that we try to occupy or at least understand that middle ground or investigate it. But a lot of the guys on our side, I mean, Grant Shapps is a classic example. I mean, what's he doing there in the first place? You can't communicate with him. It's not possible. His mind is made up. He's never going to sit there and go, you know what, valid. Let's go and have a chat.
Yeah.
How can we get out of this one? And actually, at the moment, of course, because of the Minsk Accords and everything, he feels very hard done by the West. So there's no way he's going to back down over this. If anything, he's going to bury the West as much as possible. And you understand why. From a power position, I completely understand why. Feels totally let down. So I'm taking your edge.
I think it's really interesting. If I just quickly say, it's very, very interesting that, for a start, you've got just the CIA. Okay, so the CIA have always, it seems, or at least, well, no, always, since Alan Dulles, their calculations always appears to be quite simplistic. If we've got an enemy, we decide out an enemy, North Korea, Soviet Union, whoever, Iran, then whoever is their enemy is our friend, like the Mujahideen. We'll just give them endless money and arms because they're fighting the Soviet.
Work out well.
Just only thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead at best. So it's really interesting that Putin says that, and it must be true. It seems self-evidently true that the president, that's not the guy, right? Because you're guaranteed at most he's going to be gone within 8 years.
That's right.
So it's okay, do I need to speak to some State Department people? Okay, do I need to speak to some Pentagon people?
Yeah.
Do I need to speak to people at the CIA? Who knows?
Anthony Blinken.
Did you say the CIA don't know?
Yeah, who am I speaking to? Yeah.
What?
Or are we going to sit there and throw bodies at it?
No wonder he's frustrated.
Yeah, I mean, as citizens of Western countries and being used to paying attention to politics, who can't have some sympathy of the understanding that the West doesn't seem to work as you'd expect. You can't really get stuff done, even if you win the election sometimes, which is...
Yeah, absolutely.
Or is it some Wall Street financier guys that have paid for the careers of State Department and congressmen?
Of course
do I need to speak to those guys? I mean, who knows? Who knows?
So this is an argument. So I've seen people make very good videos criticizing Putin where they explain, no, his problem is he doesn't understand how the West works. It works this way, which is complex and based on mutual agreement between countries. You know, why do you join NATO, for example? That's a choice your nation makes, etc., etc. But either way, I think it's perfectly reasonable for anyone to get out of this, oh, I can see why he doesn't understand us and therefore is frustrated. Now, does that mean he's the victim of everything as he lays out? No. Come on. It takes 2 to tango to end up in a bloody war, for Christ's sake. And he goes on to speak about very briefly Georgia, for example, where he's like, "Oh, they were going to join join NATO, and then they didn't." And it's like,
well, yeah, you did sort of run.
Did invade?
Well, the thing is, though, there's a good book called Putin's Wars, and it does actually talk about the wars that he tends to enter are reactionary, which is interesting because we think no, they're not. He's got these plans, but the book actually states it. And the book isn't a friend of Putin, but in the book, it states it. Look, these wars he stumbles into because of something happening. He's like, okay, I'll go and suppress that insurrection then and try and change that government. But it's not like a plan he has. I mean, I'll put my hands up to it. You know, I read the book and I went, oh, I kind of get it a little bit now. Like literally what he's controlling is very different to what we see as a control. I mean, he's controlling like a state that wants to rip itself apart and burn and kill everyone.
Has many times.
Yeah, exactly that. And he's controlling this. And that's why, you know, Well, arguably, you go and kill that guy because it's easier to kill that journalist than, you know what I mean? Whatever it might be doing. I mean, crikey, allegedly. But it's just that. And yeah, the wars tend to be stumbled into.
Anyway, the point being, if you wanted to understand Putin's worldview, this isn't new, but yeah, you can get it from this pretty easily. Now, let's move on. I have some clips. They're rather long, but I'll do my best. The next thing he moves on to is the fact that, okay, even if on statecraft stuff we can't agree and I can't find any ground, I kind of hate you guys anyway because you support Bandera indirectly. So,
Support what, sorry?
Bandera. So Stefan Bandera was a Ukrainian nationalist who, during the Second World War, his group either worked with or independently of the Nazis, but ended up exterminating Jews, Russians, and Poles. Now, the Poles hate this guy. So when some Ukrainian nationalists, of course, who have escaped the war, came to Polish Independence Day with their flags, they beat the crap out of them for supporting Bandera. This is a big issue in Poland. It's also a big issue in Russia, of course, because Bandera's guys are the source of what is called Ukrainian fascism and Ukrainian neo-Nazism. So he wants to talk about this.
So just to clarify, is that so after Hitler invades Russia and he gets beyond modern Ukraine or beyond Kiev anyway?
Yeah.
At that point, he puts in this Bandera person. Is that?
So he wasn't installed, is my understanding.
Okay.
Other people will know better than me, obviously. But Bandera's guys were Ukrainian nationalists that wanted the Ukrainian state. There was some overlap in this idea during the Second World War, of course. But these guys, they were genocidal. And in Ukraine, they're now known as heroes. There are streets named after him.
The movement still exists today.
Yeah, there are statues up. There are guys who march regularly. And they're not a huge force, and they never really are. But they can still amass power. And that's what Azov is, for example, guys who like him.
Yeah, sure.
Right, but let's play his words, because I'm just trying to give a Cliff Notes version there. And these are long.
If they consider themselves a separate people, they have the right to do so, but not on the basis of Nazism, the Nazi ideology.
Would you be satisfied with the territory that you have now?
Нет, сейчас закончим. Вы же задали вопрос по неонацизму и денацификации.
I will finish answering the question. You just asked a question about neo-Nazism and denazification. Look, the president of Ukraine visited Canada. The story is well known, but being silenced in the Western countries. The Canadian Parliament introduced a man who, as the Speaker of the Parliament said, fought against the Russians during the World War II. Well, who fought against the Russians during the World War II? Hitler and his accomplices. It turned out that this man served in the SS troops. He personally killed Russians, Poles, and Jews. The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. The president of Ukraine stood up with the entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man. How can this be imagined? The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Really, my question is, what do you do
notice
about
that.
it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so, I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism. But how? How do you do that?
Вот послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very subtle, and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он, казалось бы, тонкий. Он очень противный, этот вопрос.
That's Tucker's terrified
This
face. I
question
think.
appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years,
люди, которые
80 years.
уничтожали
But his
евреев,
example
русских,
lives on.
поляков, живы.
People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and
Действующий
Poles are
президент
alive.
сегодняшней Украины
And the
аплодирует
president,
ему
the
в
current
канадском
president of
парламенте,
today's Ukraine,
аплодирует
applauds him
стоя.
in the Canadian parliament,
Разве мы
gives
можем
a
сказать, что
standing
мы
ovation.
целиком выкорчевали?
Can we
That was
say
meant
that
to.
we have completely
То, что мы
uprooted
видим
this
происходит
ideology
сегодня,
if what we see is
вот что
happening
такое
today?
денацификация в нашем
That is what
Надо
denazification
избавиться от
is
тех
in
людей,
our
которые,
understanding.
эту
We have to get rid of those people who
теорию
maintain
так
this concept and support this
представляют в
practice
жизни
and
и
try to
стараются
preserve it.
сохранить.
That
Вот
is
что
what
такое
denazification
денацификация.
is.
So I play that not only because that's his, moral complaint, but also it's the only aspect where he seems to get a little bit animated.
Yeah.
You can see the sort of anger with Tucker there. He's like, "Oi."
It's valid, though. You can't say it's not valid. I mean, that did happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was utterly embarrassing.
You can go back to The Guardian. The Guardian articles from, I think, 2014, 2012 talk about the Azov brigades, talk about the Nazification of the brigades out. And I think they're the only brigades that were fighting at the time, weren't they? Because, I mean, these brigades exist. They were brigades that celebrated Ukrainian nationalism, I think. And it gets pretty deep, actually. I don't want to. But yeah, I mean, they did happen, and he's not wrong. Although, if he's alluding that was the reason he went into Eastern Ukraine to rid these people, I mean,
That's his official reason. One of them, I should say.
Was repatriation of the Russian-speaking people.
So this defending Donbass, denazifying Ukraine, two big pillars. So there we are. So yeah, I think that's probably important. The next clip I have is him talking about Nord Stream because everyone was excited. Is he just going to come out and be like,
"Yeah, I saw this one. Yeah,
you did it."
Yeah.
I'll play what he said because what he said is, if not interesting, at least strange.
Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia, make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end? And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions. It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities.
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly.
So there we are. He doesn't present the evidence, which...
No, he doesn't.
That's his reasoning.
It's valid, though. There aren't many countries that can do it. And one of them is us, as a former naval officer.
You need a submarine program, surely. And that narrows it down to like
the diving expertise. It's not something many countries actually
you would know. So who
some Western countries very good at doing it. But also, the amount of money that was generated by that pipeline. Why would you blow up your own pipeline? So you could pretend someone else blew it. It doesn't make sense. The whole thing literally doesn't make sense. I mean, the amount of money spent just building the pipeline and the fact it was supplying, I mean, this is all about America trying to supply Europe with liquid natural gas, isn't it? Across the oceans, what they're trying to bring in liquid natural gas. And of course, the whole point was he was doing it himself. And it's a way of turning, and he's got, and this is why I'm called a Putin apologist, but what is America doing in Eastern Europe? He's not over there on the Mexican border or the Canadian border, is he? But America is there on his border. And he's saying, have you got anything better to do? We've got to understand that, surely. This is why I'm called as a Putin apologist, because he makes a lot of sense with that particular point. Why are we doing it?
Which is a bigger issue to an American citizen, their own border or the Ukrainian border?
Well, you
can
argue
see sympathy in that argument.
Who's responsible for that border immigration? Arguably, Russia's probably behind a lot of the immigration that's coming in. I would have thought that's if I was him. How do I destroy a country from within? Subversion. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to infiltrate your civil service and all your departments, your administration, of course, and we're going to put lots of immigration into your country, which is going to really change the fabric of the way people vote.
If I could say something, it is a tiny bit. I don't think it is, but you could quite easily argue that it's a little bit conspiracy theory era. Okay, the Project for the New American Century, if you've ever heard of that.
I've heard of it.
Anyway, there has been in the very end of the 20th century, in the beginning of this century, quite an explicit, overt, open goal for the Pentagon and the State Department for America to essentially dominate the whole world.
Sure.
The whole world. Not actually invading everywhere in the world with tank divisions and putting puppet, but in all sorts of senses, dominating the whole world. So if you look at it through that lens, then yeah, they're in Eastern Europe. Then yeah, they're putting pressure on someone like Putin constantly. Yeah, they're going to blow up a pipeline that's making Russia and Germany richer and better. They're going to screw with that.
Because what was the point in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria, if not to dominate the Middle East? So yeah, I can see the argument.
Just having bases all around the world, really. Sorry, carry on.
I'll wrap up as much as I can. So he then goes on to speak highly of China for some weird reason, which is doubly weird from a Russian perspective because they're not the best of friends. They're only really friends right now because they need each other.
Sure.
By default. Sort of.
Yeah, that's probably just him being diplomatic, to say the least. He then goes on to say that American leadership literally doesn't matter. We've covered that. But he reiterates it where he's just like, I'm so sick of you people because I don't know who to talk to, which I'm trying to tell you that's a lot of what he says. He ends on, the whole interview ends on Tucker Carlson asking him whether or not Russia will release a US citizen who is being charged with espionage. And Tucker's very defensive of this guy. He's an editor for, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, and he was in Russia and was arrested with the claims being that he got access to classified material that he shouldn't be. And so they've kept him. And Tucker Carlson's last 20 minutes are literally just like, let him go. What are you doing? It's just like, well, what do we need to do to give you to let this guy go?
Oh, really?
So it's not him just sitting there and asking him his opinion. He does actually use the last 20 minutes to argue for the release of a US citizen as well. So there's that. And then the very end of it is this interaction, which is probably the most poetic aspect of it. And I'll play it and you can make your own opinions, of course.
This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, sooner or later it will result in agreement. You know, this probably sounds strange given the current situation. But the relations between the two peoples will be rebuilt anyway. It will take a lot of time, but they will heal. I'll give you very unusual examples. There is a combat encounter on the battlefield. Here's a specific example. Ukrainian soldiers got encircled. This is an example from real life. Our soldiers were shouting to them, "There is no chance. Surrender yourselves. Come out and you will be alive." Suddenly, the Ukrainian soldiers were screaming from there in Russian, perfect Russian, saying, "Russians, do not surrender." And all of them perished. They still identify themselves as Russian. What is happening is, to a certain extent, an element of a civil war. Everyone in the West thinks that the Russian people have been split by hostilities forever. No, they will be reunited. The unity is still there. Why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church? Because it brings together not only the territory, it brings together our souls. No one will be able to separate the soul. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?
And that's what it ends on. So there we are. He definitely believes he's got time on his side. I can't say too much about the state of Ukraine. All we get is the videos I can see online. But if we get back to the web, as previously mentioned, I've been there a lot very recently as well. And I can definitely say from what I've seen not only was this interaction entirely what is given to the Russian population, it's in line. For example, this is the NATO exhibition in the Victory Museum in Moscow, and this is just a big exhibition arguing NATO made us do this, and it's exactly the same speech, essentially. You can see here they include his invasion speech, but the idea that he's got time on his side, the Ukrainians have lost all of their women and children, they left, they're running out of manpower, it's dysfunctional, whereas in Russia, with all the sanctions, nothing's really changed. All I can add to that is from being there and speaking to as many people as I could, everyone I spoke to in Russia said nothing's really changed. Like there's been a bit of inflation and that's it, which is as bad as we've had it. So for them, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, I don't know, but his viewpoint is all I can say.
He has said, though, that he has to live with, he says that Russia has to live with whatever Ukraine ends up being. So he doesn't want to be engaged. He doesn't want to be killing Ukrainians. He said that already. Like, they're going to be on our border, whatever we do. So, we need to, and I think he's right. There's going to be a peace. There always is. But it's either going to be a peace with 500,000 dead on each side, or it's going to be a peace earlier than that. And I think with Johnson going over was one of the worst things I ever saw. An act of diplomacy to maintain that. And I was working in defence, and I can't talk too much about it, and I won't. It's not that relevant, but it's an industry that needs to be constantly fed through the taxpayer purse, and to get rid of all our LifeX missiles and weapon systems into that battlefield. Ben Wallace even said, something along the lines of, it's a test bed. This area of operations right now is a testing ground for us. And you would use it as that as well. I would, most definitely.
Every war is for us.
Of course it is, absolutely. And it's very beneficial. And arguably, it's a very useful war for us to have, to see how the Russian formations work, to test the capabilities. I mean, as an electronic warfare specialist, I can see how they work. And it's kind of how we kind of expected, but there are some very interesting developments. And that's only what I'm getting here. Imagine if you were in, like, literally that speciality.
And doesn't it mean that the MOD can now go to their overlords and say, you have to give us more money to buy new stuff now?
You're seeing it now. You're seeing it now with putting shore-based assets onto frigates that weren't there in the first place. We need to put these weapons on.
One thing you've said for a long time, or from the beginning on Twitter, which is something Putin said there that was almost lost amongst what he said in some of those last comments, is that Russia will be in this to the end. You hear on our side say, as long as it takes. You get Rishi Sunak and Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris saying, as long as it takes. It's like, no one believes you.
But I
believe Putin when he says, till the end.
Yeah, well, he's been there. I said about this earlier. Like, what was Ukraine used for? It's like, what formations went across Ukraine into Russia? That was the whole point. We accessed Russia from Ukraine. If you look at Ukraine, it's actually further east than Moscow. So he sees it as a very easy to encircle Moscow, where there's huge population densities, of course. He doesn't want that. And the Russian population don't want that. So although we might say that NATO is not offensive, he says, why does NATO exist? It didn't let him join, did it? It didn't let Russia join. So NATO exists to defend against Russia. So if you're defending against something, then that thing you're defending against, by the nature is offensive. So NATO sees Russia as offensive. So he sees NATO as offensive. And you can understand it from the Russian point of view. Why expand into Ukraine? And the people that argue with us, and I'll stop for 5 seconds, say, well, any country should be able to join NATO. And I agree, but it comes with consequence. And that's what you're looking at right here, is a massive consequence with very young people dying that you're not going to be able to rebuild your country because of.
Tragedy.
It's amateurish, the fact that the whole thing even happened in the first place. We could see it happening from 2014. In 2008 at the Bucharest summit, he said the red line, remember we have red lines, that means something. Obviously Obama's never meant anything, did it, in, I think it was Libya, with the gas attacks, but his red lines mean something. Syria, it was Syria, sorry. His red lines do mean something. The red line is Georgia and Ukraine don't get to join NATO. And we went and pushed that, and that's what happens. It's literally amateurish, is what it is. And we're doing it intentionally on purpose, and then we're crying, oh, give us weapons to go and fight something that we knew was going to happen. And at least I'm not going to say at least Putin's speaking the truth here, but when you look at it, he's not lying. He's literally saying, who can I speak to sort this thing out? I've got to live with these people. What's going on?
Well, the big takeaway from all of this is that something I argued about when Russia Today got taken off the air, obviously a Russian propaganda outlet, but we still have Al Jazeera, which is a Qatari propaganda outlet on our airways. If you can't understand your enemy, you will make stupid decisions. And one of those fundamental stupid decisions was the delusion we have in exactly what you were pointing to. What does Kamala Harris or Boris Johnson really have invested in Ukraine? Bugger all. Especially compared to someone like Vladimir Putin. He's got his entire future invested in the bloody thing. And this annoyed me to no end because I saw Douglas Murray, who did wonderful work, of course, as usual. he went to Ukraine, to the front line. He wanted to find out what their worldview was and everything else. And he wrote a great piece on it. But then at the end, he mentioned that I believe Ukraine will win because Russia has nothing to fight for. You only get to that conclusion if you are unable to listen to the Russian perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's what's interesting about any of this. I hope it did a fair enough job of just trying to lay out that's what's there.
Yeah.
And the big story on this is, oh, we can hear his viewpoint, which shouldn't be a big story. That should be the bloody norm. In which you can then,
Should be the norm.
yeah, if you think he's talking bollocks, you then turn around and say,
course.
load of bollocks,
Of course.
and life moves on. But no, instead it's been banned. But the people who did decide to go with that, that's their analysis. CNN just went with it's propaganda. It was just
I'm
propaganda.
also going to say that because it stops everything. Use the same thing. I mean, it's a war on the Russian border with no logistical supply issues whatsoever. Why would you do that?
Yeah, right, yeah.
It's
It's
Russia.
unwinnable,
It's
isn't it?
Russia.
Isn't it unwinnable
They're
for
resource
Ukraine? I don't
rich in a
see-
way that America never is. It literally is unwinnable. I've said this. It's an unwinnable war. It's never going to be won. And how do you define winning? People would say.
Well, another good question.
Well, maybe not giving Russia a third of your country would be. I mean, it's not ever going to be a winnable war. It's
for Ukraine.
of
Yeah.
course.
If the
arguably both.
Russian
if you hold on to independence in your Ukraine,
Right,
that's
sorry,
the
yeah, yeah,
version of
yeah,
winning. I don't want to. I need
No,
to
I
end
agree.
Sorry.
for the
yeah.
sake of time, if nothing
Okay.
else. But I don't wish to get into the argument about the war. My argument was just about the interview because
Yep.
that's the thing that
Okay,
happened.
fair enough.
And what is there is that while you could hear the other side, you could go and find that, but it wasn't easy, let's say the least. And it led to things like Douglas Murray saying the Russians have nothing to stand on. Go and meet them. They do have
Of
arguments.
course.
You can
course.
disagree with them, but they exist.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
So there we are. That took up way too much bloody time, but I think it was an important event. If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Epoch series, this one, Edward I, Part 1. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.